Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with Devexpress, and welcome to our webinar today, ASP.NET Simplify Security RigmaROLE, presented by Devexpress Technical Evangelist Paul Usher. Thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul Usher.
Thank you, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first presentation for 2014. Today I want to take a look at some of the ways that security can be applied with ASP.NET, along with our web form controls. A little bit of housekeeping. As Amanda said, feel free to ask your question at any time using the question window of the GoToWebinar panel. Now, these presentations are focused on questions and feedback that we receive either through the support center or directly from emails and Twitter. And it's important that people keep asking for things that they want to see. We encourage you to get in touch with us. So you can drop me a line either at paulu@devexpress.com or on Twitter @DXAustralia. Now, we're also going to be doing some short webinars like this one today that are 30 minutes. That are going to be quick-paced, hard-hitting, and trying to focus on more code-based things, less marketing. Of course, the webinar or the video will be available on our YouTube channel later on in the day. So as far as slides go, that's it. We're going to jump straight over to Visual Studio and start from here. The first thing I'm going to do is choose Devexpress from the menu, come to All Platforms, and create a new project. Now, from this template gallery, what I can do is select the platform I want to work with. And obviously today is about ASP.NET. So I'm going to choose ASP.NET from this selection, and I'm presented with either the MVC options or the web forms. And if I wanted to limit this list, I could do so by clicking on this option here. You'll notice that there are some blue markers on some items. This indicates that there's a wizard behind this particular option. So the little picture is that of a wand representing the wizard. I'm going to choose the ASP.NET Web Forms Web Application Wizard and then give it a project name. Choose Run Wizard, and I'll then be presented with the Devexpress ASP.NET Project Wizard. A quick look through this for those that may not be familiar with it. The standard option will create a vanilla website. It'll have a default.aspx page, and it will also include some account manipulation such as log on, register, change password. It will come complete with all the Devexpress libraries referenced in the project and the web.config. If I wanted to start completely from scratch, I can choose the empty option, which will still reference the Devexpress libraries, but not give me any other information inside that solution. If I wanted to create an Office-inspired or a mail type application, I could start with the Outlook wizard. This would step me through creating the navigation bars, the menus, etc., and designed to look and feel like Outlook for the web. But today we're going to jump into the custom solution. From here, I can nominate what's going to be shown in the header control, such as a menu. I can select what's happening in the left-hand area, and I'm going to stay with the nav bar. I could go back and choose a menu or a tree list view from here. In this client area, which is the only mandatory area that we have, we could have a grid view, tree list, the scheduler control, or a HTML editor. For simplicity, I'm going to leave it with a grid view today. And if I wanted to, I could turn on the right-hand area as well, and then populate that with such as a calendar control or the cloud control. And then finally, I can select what's going into the footer. Because the focus today is more on security and not the content inside the pages, we'll leave that as clean as possible. Moving along through the wizard, the next option is to choose a theme. The default option is the Devexpress theme. If I was working on a site that was targeting maybe iOS devices, I could switch to the iOS theme, or something that's more general but still enhanced for touch is the Moderno theme. And then of course we have our other offerings under there as well. I'll leave it with DevX. Move to the next page, and we have our site configuration. Now here we've got something that's important for us today. We've got the authentication model. And from this drop down, we could select non-web forms or intranet. Most of these other options you don't need to touch. And the same with the DX control settings, which allow you to tweak the compression options and resource merging, things like that. And then the final page is the localization, which again we'll leave as default. Choosing Create Project, what's going to happen now, the wizard in the background will create a new solution, create a project inside there, configure the references, set up the web.config, and allow me to start working on a real live website straight away. Some of the files that are included in there would be all the Devexpress libraries. So if we look at references, we can see that all the DX libraries have been added. And the same with web.config, everything's been inserted ready for us. Looking at the folder structure, we've got this account folder, which contains some pre-built pages, such as the login page, the register page, and change password. So if I was to run this site without doing anything else, I'm going to be using Internet Explorer today. Run the site. We're presented with a nice menu control, the project title. I'll click on Home. I should have done this from the default home page. We've got the menu control. We've got a nav bar, which is bound to some data. The nice Aspx grid control with all its power. And then on the right-hand side, we've got this Login and Register tab. If I click on Login, I'll be presented with this pre-built form. I obviously don't have an account yet, so I'm going to choose Register. Give it a username, so we'll choose Paul U, my Devexpress email address, which I'm purposely going to make a mistake on. And we can see that the form that's generated from the wizard already contains validation. So I'll correct that.com and then put in my secret squirrel password. And again, if I get the password wrong, it's going to say, hey, you've made a mistake. So correct that and create the user. Now, this particular template uses the web.security class inside the .NET framework. We now click on Login page, and I have to go back and log in again, which is less than user-friendly. I've already provided my details, but it's still wanting me to go back and log in. And that's typical of that particular framework. Now up here we can see that I'm logged in as Paul U. So that's one of the options that people would traditionally be using for securing websites right now. And if we were to take a look at some of the code behind that control, we can see that we've got this membership class which comes from the web.security framework, and that's how we would traditionally build it. Now you'd normally use something like the ASP.NET configuration tool to administer your website and define your roles. Individual pages could be secured inside web.config or within code looking at whether a user's got access to a particular role. Now this standard way of securing websites is what people have been using for many years. In fact, if we take a look at Microsoft's own documentation, it states, the ASP.NET membership was designed to solve site membership requirements that were common in 2005, which involved form authentication and a SQL database that you could store usernames, passwords, and profile data. But today, there's a much broader array of storage options for web applications available, and most developers are wanting to enable their sites to use social identity providers for authentication and authorization functionality. So what does this mean? Well, basically that people are used to logging into sites such as Google or Facebook or Twitter, and we know that there's a way to embrace that and use that within our own applications. And Microsoft came up with a really nice way of doing that. So if we wanted to switch from that traditional way, how could we build something like that inside Visual Studio? Well, let's switch back to another instance of Visual Studio. And this time, let's just make sure that the other one's not running. This time what we'll do is start with File New Project. Now, I'm using Visual Studio 2013, and that's an important aspect for what we're going to look at. If you're still running Visual Studio 2012, you'd be familiar with this style of option when you go to your templates. In 2013, everything was simplified with a single option. I'm going to choose OK, and we get the ASP.NET Project Wizard appear. One of the important differences here is that Microsoft allows us to mix and match technologies. That is, we can build a project that includes traditional web forms and MVC if we want, and Web API. And with the new security model that we're going to look at, that's an important thing as well, that the security model applies to multiple methods of website creation. We could add a unit test if we wanted to, but the thing we're more interested in is over on this right-hand side, which is to do with authentication. I'm going to choose Change Authentication and look at what's provided. The options are No Authentication, Individual, Organizational, and Windows. Well, obviously, No Authentication is for a site that wouldn't require any security at all. And a lot of sites are still like that. It's just a matter of a public-facing website. Let's show some data. Organizational accounts is related to anybody wanting to work with Active Directory, whether that's on a local domain controller or Windows Azure or even Office 365. It has full support for single and multi-tenanted uses as well as on-premise. And then the final option here is the Windows authentication that's back to the traditional intranet use. But the one we're interested in is the individual user accounts. So I'm going to select that and then click OK. Now Visual Studio is going to create another vanilla project for me. Out of the box, it's going to add support for those third-party auth logins, such as the Facebook, the Twitter, the Microsoft account, and even Google. You'll notice that the project that's been created has actually got additional folders and such in from the one we did just before. This is in part due to the fact that it's built on the Bootstrap framework. Now Bootstrap itself goes way beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but certainly something that I want to cover in a future presentation. Now that we've got our vanilla project, the next step would be to prepare the project or the solution for use with the Devexpress controls. I'll just close this page here. It's really as simple as clicking on the Devexpress menu, coming down to the ASP.NET Controls option and saying Run the Wizard to update the project. I'm presented again with the Project Wizard. I get to pick a theme if I wanted to. I'm going to leave it with the theme that's in my project. I could step through all the different settings. Again, I don't need to touch any of those, so I'm going to simply say Update Project. Now, after a couple of minutes, what we're going to see is the references, the Devexpress DLLs added into the project itself, and the web.config has been updated accordingly. So here under References, we can see all the Devexpress libraries available, and then come down to web.config, and again, we can see that the Devexpress entries have been added in here as well. If I was to run this particular project without doing anything else, just run it up into Internet Explorer, we're going to see that the page is rendered. It's got a nice look and feel out of the box. Microsoft provides some links to some standard pages. We're going to see on the top right-hand corner that we've got a login and registration process as well. Just waiting for GoToWebinar to render the screen. And there we have it. So vanilla application, it's ready for me to drop those Devexpress controls in. Out of the box, we've got our title, so menu, and these options. If I go to the login option here, what we're going to see is we're presented with the traditional username and password box. But then on the right-hand side, it's saying, hey, you could log in using another service, and here's an article that will tell you more about it if you wanted to. We'll jump over now to Visual Studio and have a look at what's involved in actually activating those third-party auths. The first step is to come to the app start folder and to find the startup.auth.cs file. And we'll notice in here that there's a number of lines that are commented out. And Microsoft provide the information here, say, uncomment the following lines to enable logging with a third-party provider. So I'm going to grab those lines and press the uncomment key. Now, in order to bypass the checks that they've got, I'm just going to put some dummy information into each of these. But on each respective provider's website, you'd be able to register and claim your consumer key and your consumer secret in order to start using these. For today, I'm going to focus on the Google authentication, which doesn't require me to expose, obviously, any public information or private information on the webinar. Just by accessing or uncommenting those lines, I've now given the website the ability to log people in via a social third-party provider. So let's run that again. And we'll do two things now. First thing we'll do is register me as a normal user in a traditional sense. Don't have a third-party account. I'm just going to create a brand new account. And then the second part of what we'll do is register with Google. So if I go to login, you'll notice straight away that now we've got some buttons appear without having to do any extra work. And it's saying, hey, you've enabled Google, Facebook, Twitter, and a Microsoft authentication. So option 1 is just to come in and register Paul Yu with a secret password and say register. One of the frequent questions that we get asked is, where is this information going and how do I then change that to work with my database? Straight away on registering, you can see that it's not only added me but logged me straight in. So the user experience is a little cleaner with this new method. While Visual Studio is running, we'll jump back over to it and we'll click on View Server Explorer. Inside the data connections, we've got the default connection, which is being read from web.config. And when I double click on that, I can expose the tables that are available. Here we've got our ASP.NET or ASP.NET users table, and I'm going to say show table data. And what we'll be able to see is that the user I just created, Paul Yu, has been added to this table. There's the password that's nice and securely presented, and we know that that has now worked. Go back to the website. This time I'm going to log off and choose a login based on a third-party authentication and see what actually happens. So I'm going to log in using a different service. I'm going to choose Google. It takes me straight out to the Google website. I get to put in my Google address, paulyu@devexpress.com, and then my secret squirrel password, and sign in. From here, I'm taken back to a permissions form to say, hey, this website, which in our case is localhost, wants to access some information, such as your email address and basic information. I'm okay with that, so I'll accept. And then I'm taken straight back to the website, the calling website, so localhost in our case, and I'm going to be presented with another option. And it's saying you can now register with your Google account. You're already authenticated. Please choose a username, which is giving me one, and then log in. So when I say log in, it's now completed that whole process. We can see that I'm logged in with a different user, and it was a seamless process using that third-party auth. One of the nice things here out of the box is the fact that I can edit that membership. So I can come in and I could set up a local password if I wanted to. It's going to show me what registered logins exist. Now Google is the odd one out at the moment. If I was to log in using Facebook or Twitter or the Microsoft account, I could actually remove that account from this page. In this case, you'd have to do that at the Google level. So what difference has that made inside my data table? Well, we'll jump back over here, and we're still looking at our ASP.NET users table. I'll do a data refresh, and we can now see an additional user called Paul Usher, no password stored, etc. So how does it know that it's using a third-party auth for future logins? Well, if I look at this table, ASP.NET user logins, and go show table data, we can see that the user ID linked back to that Paul Usher account has a login provider of Google and a provider key. So it allows me to store multiple logins and authentication from different places for a single user. While we're looking at this table, we've also got things such as the ASP.NET roles and user roles, which we'll be looking at in a little more depth on part 2 of this presentation. Now, this is all well and good, being able to provide simple login information from a third party. But what about the fact that I might want to capture some more information, such as a first name and a last name or other key things? Well, this is where the framework is really nice to work with. And what we'll do now is we'll actually create a couple of extra fields and see what's involved. So the first thing we're going to do is come down to the model and open up the identity model CS file. We've got this class called application user, which is based on identity user. And the first thing we'll do is create a public string and say first name, like so. I'm going to duplicate that using the CodeRush duplicate line and make this one last name. So I've now got 2 fields available to that class. The next thing I'd want to do would be actually create some fields on the form to work with. So I'm going to come back up to the account folder. I'm going to find the register Aspx file, and if we switch to design for one quick second, we can see that this is the form that the user is presented when they're creating their logon for the first time. So back inside the source, what I'm going to do here is paste a small snippet, which is a label. It has an associated control with the text field called first name, which is this one here. Another label, which is an associated control with the text field for last name. Go back to design, and we can see that those boxes are in there. Now, there's one final step required in order to bind this information all together. What we'll do is we'll have a look at the code behind the register.aspx page, and we can see here this is where the application user is instantiated. Let's get rid of Solution Explorer and give us some space. So we'd come along and say that we want first name to be equal to firstname.text, and finally we want last name to be equal to lastname.text. And that takes care of the binding on the form create. When the security model was designed, it was designed with entity framework code first type scenario. So now that we've actually added in all the necessary pieces at this level, there's one thing left that we have to do, and that is to actually update the security database. This is done in 3 simple steps. If we come up to Tools and go down to the Package Manager, I'm going to be working inside the Package Manager console. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is simply say Enable Migrations. And once that's finished and comes back, we're going to tell it that we want to add a migration. Now, obviously, it's important that we get our spelling and things correct at this point. So that's now finished. We're going to say Add Migration Name. And then the final step will be to actually tell it to update the database schema. So update database. And that's finished. So running the project again, let's see what effect that's had. We're going to get and start with our basic page. we're going to head over to the right-hand side and tell the system that we want to register yet another new user. So register. Username, we'll pick on Amanda. So we'll say Amanda C. First name Amanda, last name C. And password, we won't tell her what it is. She can't do any online shopping and get herself in any trouble. So password there and register. Again, it's going to automatically log us into the website. It's going to return us to that page showing us that we're logged in and we've got Amanda C. But importantly, let's see what happened in the background. So looking at this ASP.NET users table again, show table data, we can see that the first name and last name columns have been added to that schema nicely and that it's captured that information as we expected. But just as important, and what's really cool, is it hasn't had any negative effect on any data that was there already. All that information is captured and kept. The other cool thing with this particular project is that it is responsive. So when, as I said before, when we add in some of the controls that we're going to play with in part 2 of this, when we secure this site and start compressing it down, we'll see how nice it is to have that responsive nature. Amanda, how are we doing for questions?
Hey, Paul, we don't have any questions yet.
No questions. Well, that's the technical aspect of it all, so I'm expecting at least one question, Amanda.
The only thing that just popped in is from Tony. And it says XPO.
XPO. That's not a question, Tony. That's a statement. So is the question, can we use XPO to handle the database work? Or am I making questions up now?
I don't know. Tony, can you clarify? And then from Jamie, how do you assign the attributes or roles to users?
Now, that is a great question, Jamie. And one of the things that we went through, or we discovered when planning for this presentation, moving from the Microsoft removed the ASP.NET configuration tool when they moved to Visual Studio 2013. And traditionally, that's how you'd be doing the roles. What we're going to do is, keeping these webinars nice and short, because that's some of the feedback we've had, is actually show you how to secure individual sections of the website on part 2 of this webinar, where we'll be going through and implementing specific controls and showing you how to lock people out, for want of a better word, specific areas, and how to create and administer your own roles and memberships tables from within the website. Now, I don't believe it's up on our Devexpress site yet, but the invitation for that webinar will be going up today for us to present next week. Anything from Tony?
All right, so Tony clarified. He said, is there a possibility, Paul?
Yes, I'm here.
Tony clarified, is there a possibility to do the same with XPO?
Again, it's a great question. Using the out-of-the-box template, Tony, Microsoft have built everything around the entity framework. Not to say that you can't use XPO to do this. You are going to be recreating some of the work that's already provided for you in the template. But certainly, given the fact that generating the roles and memberships is about a 15-20 minute process next time, I don't see why we can't spend a few minutes next time looking at doing this in XPO and seeing it side by side.
Great. From Mike, is this an example of the new ASP.NET identity system that replaces the traditional ASP.NET membership system?
That's exactly what it is, Mike.
All right. So Mike says, thanks. Looks great. And that's all the questions there are.
All right, so if anybody has any questions in between this session and part 2, please feel free to email me. The details are on screen. We will put up the invitation for part 2, and already you can see that from the feedback from people like Tony as to how we can fashion or shape some of these presentations around questions and specific examples that you're wanting to see. And that's important from our point of view, that we want to be delivering content that developers are wanting to use in real-world scenarios.
All right, Paul, a couple more questions popped in. How much of this webinar is applicable in Visual Studio 2010?
The template that we showed you in the web security or the identity doesn't apply to 2010. Those templates are part of Visual Studio 2013. The initial template that I showed you using the Devexpress project wizard is certainly something you can do inside Visual Studio 2010 using the original or traditional ASP membership framework.
From Lee, is the SQL database a local database within the app, or does it need hosting on a SQL server?
Well, normally your SQL database would be hosted on your IIS machine. So inside the web.config, if we take a quick peek at that, so View, Solution Explorer, and web.config, you have a couple of lines, or in this case, one line that points to a connection string. The Microsoft template is hooking it up to an instance of local DB, but of course you can replace that with any instance of SQL, whether it be running on the same box or another box. If we look into the other demo, and we can see here that we have the connection string pointing to a running instance of SQL Express. Now, in this case, it's attaching the ASP.NET DB for looking after the membership, but you could change this and include it in your own schema, but that's where you'd need to make sure you run the necessary creation procedures to create the tables in that traditional method, and that's done with the ASP.NET security configuration tool.
Okay, great. From Tracy, is this membership database SQL Server compact?
Again, you can use any of the database schemas that are supported in that connection string. So you could use a compact database, you could use a local database. My preference is usually SQL Express because it's already installed. It comes down to where you're going to be deploying it. I mean, you could host this thing on Azure as well and use Azure SQL to have it. And the fact that with the identity option, so the second part of that presentation, it's going to generate the schema and look after things based on Entity Framework. So if you can hook into it with Entity Framework, then you're going to be able to utilize it.
Great, because that was Mike's next question about if this works with Azure.
Yes, it does.
And then let's see. I can see on the Run Wizard the mobile theme is ready for 13.2.7 question mark.
The Modeno theme or the iOS theme? The 13.2.7, which was released this week, and that's a great, again, an amount of work that the team have put into releasing some updates to the 13.2 that was released in December. There's a number of themes that are available straight out of the box for any ASP.NET website. Some are based on, like the iOS theme is designed to make your website look and feel more like an iOS application, so that native feel, where the Modeno theme is designed for a more generic touch approach.
John says this new membership framework works for Oracle too.
Is that a question or a statement? I've not tried it on anything outside the Microsoft camp, so I'd have to get back to you if it was a question.
It was a question, so we'll see.
All right. Well,
and then Mike asks if you could do a webinar at some point on ASP.NET MVC/DevX controls with a Windows Azure application.
Absolutely. If you maybe drop me an email on something you might like to see covered, like a topic that you might want to see covered inside that, I'd be more than happy to do that.
All right. Looks like that is officially all the questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we can see you next week where we start securing some of those pages and look into a little bit more depth on the membership side of things, on the roles.
Great. All right, everybody. So like Paul said, there is keep an eye out for part 2. It's not posted to the website yet, but it will be later today. I will answer Samuel's question right now. The possibility to watch this webinar again, yes, it will be available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/developerexpress this afternoon Pacific Standard Time. So you can check back for it there. And you can also find it at devexpress.com/webinars. All right, so that's it. Thanks to Paul for presenting, and thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder again, when you exit this webinar, you will see a very short survey. I think it's just one question. Please take a second to comment. We do truly appreciate it. And thank you for choosing Devexpress. Bye-bye.